Yes, I think I am. Recording pending. You are recording. I'm about to let people in. Are you all ready? Okay.
Sure.
Tell me when to start. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for joining us this morning for our kickoff session as we plan our Cloud Days event. And I'd like to welcome you to the panel discussion that we're going to have on planning your cloud migration. We do have some information for you about polling because we're going to be doing polling throughout the presentation this morning. So the information is on here. You can either text as part of the poll presentations, or you can go on the internet and go to www.pollev.com and type in Dean Dorton and select join. Either way, we'd like to have you participate in our polls as we go along. And I'd like to introduce you to our panelists this morning. I'm Judy Nichols. I'm going to be the moderator, and I am the Director of Data Analytics and Collaboration for Dean Dorton. And David, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is David Rice. I lead our infrastructure consulting team, which is your any of your server infrastructure, your networking infrastructure, your voice and video infrastructure, basically anything that props up your business from a physical box standpoint. That's usually my area.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Paulina Nikolova, and I am an Associate Director in Technology Consulting, leading our Managed Services team. Our Managed Services team focuses on day-to-day support needs and IT administration, and we work closely together with Judy and David and Greg.
And Greg?
Yes, my name is Greg Petratus, Data and Collaboration Consulting Chief Architect. So I'm on the team that the Data and Collaboration team is focused in on the business, implementing business processes and business applications on the data and collaboration technology stacks of Microsoft 365 and Azure. So I focus more on the application and business process side of collaboration.
Right. And I'd like to encourage you as we walk through this presentation and the conversations, if you have a question, to please put it in the chat, and Julia will help us watch those questions and we'll feed them into the panel as well. So we've talked just a little bit about some of what our team does, and just a reminder that we're here as Dean Dorton as a business process consulting and a transformation company. So we're here to help you in ways that help you transform your business and help you move forward. So let's start with a poll question if we can, and the information is there on the top to help you figure out how to move forward and how to answer these questions. But where are you in your cloud migration journey now? Because I think that'll help us as we answer the questions and move along to know where the people that are watching might be right now. Are you fully immersed? Are you just getting started? Are you planning for the future? Right now, we're seeing that most people haven't started yet, which is not that uncommon. I think we see that a lot, don't you think? We hear from people that are just getting going, really know that they need to get there, but don't know how to get there at all. Got a few people planning for the future. I think that gives us a pretty good idea of what we're seeing right now. Okay, I'm going to move on to our first question. So panel, what do you think are the high-level elements that need to be considered as somebody starts to put a plan together? And I think that fits well with what we just saw from our poll questions. David, do you want to start out?
Sure. For me, one thing that I've seen over the years is when cloud first came out, I think VMware wasn't necessarily the first person to say it, but they were one of the first people to push your private clouds, and then they started offering public cloud services. But they first started pitching it as a cost savings mechanism, which I think was a little bit misleading. I think when you're moving to the cloud, you should consider how you will spend your money differently. You'll be done buying boxes for my team, buying a server, buying an application that you install on a particular machine in your office, to a recurring, a little bit lower cost up front, but a recurring that's always going to be there over time. So consider that it's not necessarily a cost savings, it's a transformation in how you're going to spend your money.
Okay. So thinking through the budget a little bit and how it's going to change in your budget process.
Right.
Okay. Paulina, how about from your perspective?
Starting out, one of the first things to consider is your reasons for moving to the cloud. What drives your decision to evaluate the cloud as a possibility, as a good solution for your business? Is it flexibility? Is it scalability? Is it to accommodate remote workforce needs? And establishing those reasons first will help you build that timeline and plan for how the migration should happen and what resources should be explored.
Good point. It always helps, I think, to start from the business perspective, right? And not just because everybody's telling me we should do it.
Right.
So, Greg, how about from your perspective?
Yeah, so the cloud is a pretty broad concept, incorporating on infrastructure, VMs and servers, to all the way up to business applications that already exist in the cloud, taking things that may already have an on-prem component or an on-prem implementation, SharePoint, email, business applications such as QuickBooks or Sage, and moving those components into the cloud so that you're no longer responsible for maintaining servers and services, backups, recoveries, at least from a micro level. And so there's a lot of different components. And so as you're looking at the moving, what pieces of that do you want to move? And do you need to or have a desire to do more of a big bang approach where you're trying to move a whole block of workloads from on-prem to the cloud? Or is this something that you can do iterative? We know that this is the direction we want to go in. Let's kind of dip our feet into the pool by moving one or two workloads, a server or email, and then progress from there.
That makes sense. So let's think a little bit more about how you'd advise someone to start to evaluate their business applications, because I think all too often we think we can just do a lift and shift and it's that simple. We're just going to pick it up, we're going to drop it in, but there's really a lot of options as we go there. Are they going to be a SaaS model? Are they going to be an infrastructure as a service model? What's going to make the most sense? And as you start to do that, David, that probably comes to your team first, right? They start reaching out to you and saying, okay, just pick up this application that we have and move it over.
Yeah, talking about infrastructure as a service, when the public clouds, Azure and AWS first came out, I kept looking for, okay, how can I take this server I have on premises and just hit a button? It might take a few days because of a lot of data, but hit a button and move to the cloud. Well, it was never that easy. And it's, in most cases, it's still not that easy today. It's a whole lot easier now than it used to be, because from a technical standpoint, the underlying hardware was changing, and so you couldn't just move it. So that's something that you need to evaluate. What's my downtime? Can I do it in a stepped fashion? Because you're generally going to have to probably stand something new up in the cloud, whether it's infrastructure as a service or software as a service, and then move your existing to the cloud. And on the software as a service side, a lot of software vendors will offer that thick application that you run on site. And then they'll say, we have the cloud version, but they're usually totally two different things. You know, QuickBooks Cloud is totally different from QuickBooks on premises. And you can migrate pieces of your company file over fairly easily, but it's not one-to-one feature.
The functionality is
yeah,
very different, yeah.
right.
So Greg, I'm going to come back to you in a moment, Paulina. But Greg, I know that a lot of times when customers come to you with this, they aren't thinking about the changes that an application might need to have. And so can you tell us a little bit about how you approach this type of issue?
Yeah, you phrase that slightly differently than I was anticipating.
Go ahead, jump in the way you need to.
Oh, no, that's fine. So when we're looking at moving applications into the cloud, as David said, you know, sometimes, particularly with packaged applications, there's an on-prem version and a cloud version, and they can have strong functionality overlap, but they can be different. And so it's not just a pick up and move. So you have to kind of consider, you know, what's the benefits, or look at the benefits of what does the cloud uniquely have to offer, and is that a compelling reason for doing that move? And another thing that you might want to consider, if you have, depending on timing and how well your current applications support your workloads, support your needs, is this the time to make the switch? I've been thinking about switching from QuickBooks to Sage for quite some time. Maybe now is the time to evaluate that. And if we're going to have to go through a training issue, maybe we just do it the one time. Now that is a lot more demanding of the organization than just switching from QuickBooks Prem to QuickBooks Cloud. In addition to the big applications, also have to look at the smaller applications, the one-offs. These are the things that you've installed on you may have purchased and installed on a VM or an actual server, and you need to move it. You want to move that to the cloud because you don't want to be responsible for the hardware anymore. There's a lot of benefits to the cloud. So can you move that into a virtual machine? Is this something that should be considered for a refactoring or rewrite? Again, that's a lot more demanding from a project perspective, but may get you in a better place at the end of the day. And you could potentially even move from, here is an application that was developed to run on a Windows server in your office. Let's move it up to the cloud. Well, does it have to run on a virtual server? Can we take that and re-architect it partially to just run it in Azure Web Services and Azure SQL, or maybe just completely rework the application into something completely new, which is even better for the organization. Now, a lot of those, I assume that you're going to have the time to do that transition and the cost to do that transition. So that may not, for most cases, that may or may not be a reasonable thing to do, but it is something to consider.
And Paulina, how about then when this starts to move into your area, the managed services area, how does this affect you there?
These conversations in managed services typically happen during the budget planning phase. So as we're working with our clients and we start to define what does our budget look like for the next calendar year, the next fiscal year, what do we need? Do we have aging hardware that needs to be replaced? Do we have a legacy Exchange server that we need to think about migrating to Exchange Online? So we typically start these conversations in budget planning on the business side. What is it that we need and how do we get there? And as we start to evaluate and specifically line of business applications, there is not always going to be a software as a service option. It may be that you're running an application that the vendor doesn't have a software as a service option developed, or there is not a suitable replacement. So then we start to evaluate, do we keep it on-prem or do we look at infrastructure as a service options? And what does that look like? What is the right platform to host this service, to host our infrastructure, and how do we get there? So we establish the business objectives before we transition into defining the technical requirements.
All right, so you brought up a.
And actually, Judy, if I could, because there was one other thought that I had that when we're asked in the question about infrastructure as a service or software as a service, one of the things that always comes to mind to me is, who are you as a company and as an organization? What are your core competencies? What's the key differentiator for who you are, what your organization is, and what services or products are you providing? Infrastructure as a service means that you are still going to be retaining some skills that aren't really in a line with your business practice, with your key corporate differentiator. So if you're a healthcare provider, what you're good at is healthcare. Do you really want to spend the energies to maintain the server level, virtual machines patching, security management, or do you want to just hand off all of that because that's not what your specialty is? So my ultimate objective, I think, is to move towards a SaaS model as much as possible, because that you let someone else handle that while you focus in on what you are, what makes you the organization that you are. You're not a hardware company, probably. You're not a software company. You're not an infrastructure company. So as much as you can offload that onto someone else, do that so that you can focus your energies on your business.
Any other thoughts before I move on? All right. So the next question that we started to get into a minute ago is thinking about an M365 migration, which I think is where a lot of people start. You mentioned, we've got an aging Exchange server, or we've got to somehow migrate our email. People, I think, always start with email when they're going on this journey. And what do we start to think about? We limited this intentionally to M365 because we could cover a range of topics here. And so we needed to find some way to limit the conversation a little bit. But if you think about moving email Exchange, Teams, SharePoint Online content, how do you start? How long do you prepare for such a migration? And actually, I think I want to take out the word long. How do I prepare for an M365 migration?
And it starts by envisioning what success looks like. You're right. These are the core services that a Microsoft 365 migration, in our experience, this is where we typically see things start to move, is with an email migration. And envisioning what success looks like on day one gives you a starting point to build your roadmap and define what your plan should look like. Do users know how to access the new resources available to them? Do they know how to log into their new mailbox, whether they're accessing through Outlook, a mobile device, webmail? Do they know where to find the resources they need? Do they have access to shared resources that they had in the past, a shared mailbox, the right permissions to the shared mailbox, shared calendars, public folders? Can they scan to email? This is something we need to think about again. Do they have the right settings that they used to have in their previous setup? Do they have their signature lines? Do they have their Outlook configured the way that they're used to seeing it? And envisioning what that looks like on day one gives you a checklist of things that you need to think about. SMTP relays, the number of mailboxes and licensed users that you need, the number of shared mailboxes, public folders or calendars, and what is the best way to migrate those resources? How do we start to think about what does that look like in Microsoft 365 versus what we're used to seeing in Exchange on-prem.
And if I can hold you to last, if that's all right, David, we'll give you the last word on this. Greg, how about from your perspective? You tend to stay away from Exchange, which Paulina just covered very well, and focus more on the SharePoint
Right.
Online side and Teams.
Yeah, and it's getting back to the core competencies, differentiators. My specialty is more on the being more on the application and business process side of things. I do tend to stay away from email migrations to folks like Paulina's team who are much more skilled in that. And I'm glad that you mentioned the scan to email, but there may also be some other applications. The authentication path for Exchange Online or the authentication options is a lot stricter for very good reasons than Exchange on-prem. So Exchange on-prem, you could still be using some legacy username password authentication. And you could have some applications in-house that don't support a multi-factor authentication path to talk to the email server. So there may be some application implications, which would be similar to the scan to email scenario of fax devices trying to send emails. But so there's a lot of other dependencies on the email, as I said, custom applications, which may need to communicate, either send or receive emails that need to be considered. From a SharePoint perspective, and I don't know that I see that SharePoint probably on-prem is nowhere near as prolific as Exchange Server. But from a SharePoint perspective, some questions would be, considering what version you're on and what customizations you have in SharePoint that could limit or cause complications in moving to online. SharePoint on-prem, it can be difficult to maintain. Finding good folks who can do the SharePoint administration can always be a challenge. And so you may not always have your SharePoint environment nearly as up to date as some of your other applications. So versioning can be an issue. And how you use SharePoint can also be an issue. And that kind of gets back into the customization element. There are a handful of organizations that have used SharePoint as a public-facing website. That's never really, Microsoft has been discouraging that for a number of years. And moving into the cloud, you won't be able to do that. So you may have to look at other alternatives. Yeah, I think that pretty much covers what I wanted.
And even if I could just add something, even if you're not familiar with SharePoint today, here's something to think about. Microsoft has been moving away or trying to move away from support for public folders. If you have a traditional Exchange server set up with public folders in your Exchange email server, as you think about that email migration, SharePoint could be a great way to transition how you are managing those public folders. Teams and SharePoint can provide better ways of facilitating that communication and using Teams channels and groups to publish and communicate some of this information to your end users, or an intranet site. That could be a great way to share content that today may be in a public folder in Exchange.
I think along those lines, planning for that area is most
Absolutely.
important, because it's not just like anything else. It's not just take your files from here and dump them over and hope that it all works well. It takes time and planning.
And I'm glad that you brought that up, because SharePoint Online, SharePoint on-prem, I think one of the reasons why it hasn't had the adoption that a prevalent adoption across all organizations is because it was really difficult to fit it into the business workload. Yes, it met some really good needs, but it was difficult it required a shift in thinking for how users accessed files and communicated with each other. And is SharePoint a document repository, or is it a news aggregator or collaboration tool? I think the online versions of all of these tools, particularly SharePoint Online, with the layering on top of Teams, is a much stronger collaboration platform. And this isn't quite really so much of a preparation for the migration, but as part of this process, you do, I think it would be well for the organization to try to get some excitement in terms of what these tools have to offer. And so a little bit of a sales pitch, but I would encourage you to participate in a customer immersion experience where Dean Dorton can provide this, where you can come in and touch the tools and see what the tools have to offer. And in doing so, we often find that it finally clicks for people. Oh, okay, so this is why I would want to use Teams and SharePoint Online. And but not so much because I like those tools, but I've experienced what I can do with them. There's things that I want to do. How do I ad hoc pull together a team of people to work on a project and share files between that? That's what you're trying to do. You're not trying to use Teams or SharePoint Online, but to understand the vision of how this can work for you, I think can help drive that excitement, drive and drive this project forward.
David.
I've got two kind of quick points that are kind of completely different. The first one is the way Microsoft bundles their licensing. You get a ton of features. Just the list of check boxes you can enable for a user is pages long. And so my advice would be, don't check all of them on day one and just throw them at your users. Take some bite-sized pieces, email something they use every day. They know how that works. That's an easy transition. But then take some bite-sized pieces and introduce them to them over time with proper adoption training. So that would be one piece of advice. And then another thing, coming from my infrastructure side, is data protection or backup. Microsoft has motivation to keep their servers up and running and have no problems all the time. But they do have problems, and your data is at risk from a risk from the inside, but also from the outside and underlying infrastructure, even though their uptime is really good. So having a proper data backup that you're responsible for and you're managing, it should be part of your planning, because you can't always guarantee that you won't have an employee that has admin access that exits the company under bad terms and goes in and deletes everybody's mailbox permanently. Or, you want to be able to recover from those scenarios that are out of Microsoft's hands. Or, the odds aren't zero that Microsoft won't lose your data either. They're close, but they're not zero.
A good backup plan, data recovery plan is always important, no matter whatever tool set is. All right. So we're going to put together another poll here, and we want to know, have you put together a defined plan for a migration? We'd like to see what you're doing. And again, the poll instructions are at the top of the screen. We'd like to know, yes, you've got the budget, security, mapping, and timeline all planned out. You've got some elements defined, or no, haven't really done any of this yet. First responses are no, not really, which lends itself well for the next few questions we're going to get into. Not seeing a lot of change. Oh, we've got a few that some people have started to define some elements. All right, we're going to split half and half here. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next question. So how do you, and you mentioned this at the very beginning, David, how do you start to convert an on-prem budget to a realistic cloud budget so that you can do a good comparison and begin your planning?
I think you need to change your mindset in that, you're typically thinking, I'm going to spend X dollars a year, or, here's my budget for X dollars for these capital improvements. I'm going to buy a piece of hardware. And so your budget may spend a lot one year, and then you go down a little bit over a few years, and you spend a lot one year, in the traditional buying of physical infrastructure. And so with the cloud budget, it's, obviously the upfront cost of migrating to the cloud, but then once you're there, you're paying, constant monthly, or you can commit annually or multi-year to save a little bit, but you're fixing your costs. But the last piece of that is, depending on the size of your organization, the amount of resources you have in the cloud, there are companies who their sole product is to make sure you're not overspending in your infrastructure that you have in the cloud. Am I sitting here paying for a cloud virtual machine that's got a terabyte of RAM, but it's only using 50 gigs? So I can drop that down and save some money. So just keep those things in mind, that, if you're a larger business and you're putting all your stuff in the cloud, that extra piece of software that kind of monitors your spending and making sure you're right sizing things will pay for itself over time.
Sure. Paulina?
I think evaluating existing services, especially when we start to look at Microsoft 365, Microsoft has expanded some of their business plans, specifically Microsoft 365 Business Premium, to include a lot of security features for endpoint management, email and spam filtering, endpoint protection, and there can be a lot of overlap with existing tools that you have today. So as you start to evaluate your licensing needs, think about it on a more broad scale of looking at all of the licensing you have and evaluating what fits where and how do these licenses and services start to work together. And then as we plan for the user licensing needs, that will, again, depend on what we have today. So starting with an inventory of the line of business applications, what do we plan to migrate? What users do we have using these applications? What do we actually need as we start to move to the cloud? I think that provides a good starting point for budget planning.
And to Blaine's point on users, when you were buying stuff on site, you would almost always buy, okay, I've got 75 users today, but I may grow to 100, by the end of next year, so I'm going to buy 100 now. And then you find a year later you didn't grow. Well, with many or most cloud services, you can buy what you need today, and then you hire that new person. You just go into the cloud, tick a box, and now you've got that extra license. So you don't have to, build in capacity. You can grow as your company grows.
Yeah. Greg, do you want to add some thoughts there?
Yeah, so my unique perspective for this panel is from more of an regarding application development and building things, building new or maintaining existing things in more of a cloud native environment. So instead of a virtual machine, having Azure SQL, Azure Web, using Key Vault to store privileged sensitive information, using Azure data lakes and logic apps and function apps and all sorts of things that application functionality that can very easily be spun up to meet business needs. But it can also be very challenging to manage the budget for that, to keep from getting sprawl. So as you're looking at moving to more native development, it would be a good idea to figure out early on in the process, how are we going to organize the resources that we create in the cloud, such that we know how to delete those things that are no longer needed that are costing us money. So managing the ongoing costs in cloud native applications becomes much more challenging from a budgetary perspective, because we're not just talking licensed users. That's fairly easy to get your hands around, or applications running on virtual machines, and those you can do. You probably won't have you probably will have a number of virtual machines that's fairly easily manageable and you can scale up and down. But how many logic apps do you have that are automating business processes? How many data factories do you have that are piping data from this database into this database for Power BI? And all of those things are costing money, and it's not necessarily significant, but every dollar is important. So developing a strategy early on for how you're going to monitor those things going forward. Also, it's very easy for those people who have the authority to create things in Azure. It's very easy to spin things up in Azure, and it's very easy to spin up things that cost a lot of money. If you're not paying attention. I'm creating a virtual machine. Well, this is just going to run this little website. Taking this little website that's running on-prem, sticking it in a VM in the cloud. Let me give it a terabyte of storage, solid state storage, and 128 gigs of memory. Really easy to do, but that's going to be a very expensive VM. And so you want to make sure that everything is scaled properly, because it's going to be very easy to accidentally spin up something that is going to eat up your budget.
So it sounds to me like we're kind of saying, just like any other accounting type system, you should have checks and balances.
Yep.
And this is what's great about the diversity of our team and the different levels of the different areas of expertise that we have, is that we can provide a different perspective. We can help you evaluate each area of that cloud migration. We can help put together a cost comparison and share that with the business owners.
And I'm going to give just a short plug for some of the other sessions happening today. They're going to talk about some of the cost optimization options for the cloud and ways that you can manage, and some of the tools that David referenced that are available to help overlook some of these things. Or not overlook, but compare and manage some of these things. Overlook was the wrong choice there. All right. So our next question, what about the network? Are there options to move your network to the cloud as well? David, this sounds like it's right up your alley.
Yeah, there are multiple networking vendors. So you can't move your entire company to the cloud unless you send everybody home and have them connect into something in the cloud. But if you have a brick and mortar office, at some point you've got to connect offices, connect your internet connection coming into different rooms wirelessly or wired. And there's multiple vendors out there that provide hardware, but with the kind of the cloud idea of managing it. The one that we typically lead with is Cisco Meraki, and it scales from the smallest business up to businesses of thousands of employees. And it's cloud-based. If I need to make a change, I don't have to be sitting here at my desk, or I don't have to VPN anywhere to do it. I just log into their web portal where the device is registered back to, and make the change. And there's a mobile app. You can reboot the device. Somebody calls you as you're walking into dinner, and before you even have your drinks, you could have rebooted the device if that's what was needed from the mobile app. So those provide lots of simplification and agility for your business.
On the day-to-day support side, within our team, within managed services, some of the things that we look for is this solution easy to deploy? As David mentioned, if you have a physical office location, there will be some physical hardware. But with the cloud, the actual management of the device devices being in the cloud, there's simplified administration, there's easier way to apply updates and monitor alerts for events that are happening on the network. And this not only makes our team happy because it simplifies the day-to-day administration for us, but also our cybersecurity team who monitors those alerts and events that are happening on the network.
Greg, do you have anything to add in here?
As someone who's almost always shied away from dealing with networking, I have very little to add to this, other than I guess I'm kind of curious from David and Paulina about how the changes in work from home have affected, particularly when we look at the cloud, how it's affected bandwidth concerns and issues. Are we seeing as we move to the cloud that while we still need the on-prem network, we can simplify things because more people are working remotely and more people are accessing cloud resources?
For us, what we see, and this is with customers of all sizes, we have big healthcare customers that sent their billing departments or admin departments home during COVID, and the same cloud hardware provider, Cisco Meraki, they provide a teleworker device, which you can put it behind your home router if you want to keep it 100% work separate, and it basically gives you the ability to put your employee who's sitting at home as if they were in the office. And it's purpose built for that, and it was there before the pandemic, but it's been, those have been flying out the door as quickly as they can make them, since everybody's been working from home. And most of if you read the articles where people talk about IT trends, most of the people are saying that the trend to that type of work, remote work, hybrid work is not going to go away. People have found that in many cases they're just as productive or maybe even more productive, or they found that they don't necessarily need a brick and mortar office, or they can get away with a smaller office, or like at a healthcare facility, their non-clinical staff, healthcare facilities, space is always a premium. So if they can send their non-clinical staff to work from home to free up more space to have another office for a medical department, then they're going to take advantage of that.
And reliability, I think we've started to see more focus being placed on reliability and redundancy options for internet connectivity. And if you had one internet service connection, but now you have more demand from employees working from home and connecting in, it's important to evaluate whether the network device that you've chosen supports that redundancy and the option for a second internet connection, which Meraki is, we lead with those devices that do support that secondary connectivity for load balancing or failover. We started to see more focus in that area.
It's, bandwidth wise, it's not as bad as it used to be for home internet. Nowadays, if you live in Lexington metro area, you can get fiber to your house fairly easily. I believe Louisville's very similar, and even some of the rural areas you can get AT&T fiber to your home. So it is much less of an issue now than it was even 5 years ago for remote workers.
Definitely a changing landscape.
Yeah.
And I think that HR teams are finding that having the capacity to support remote workers is definitely a plus in terms of hiring right now. Right. So what are the most common security concerns that people should be addressing? Because I think that's something we haven't talked a lot about, but it's definitely part of moving to the cloud. Part of any type of your business, but certainly as you move to the cloud. And Greg, we haven't had you start very much, but I'm going to have you start with this one and then we'll move around.
Yeah, so as we move to the cloud, one of how users authenticate is going to be extremely important in cloud scenarios. So the ideal world, as our group has developed applications, we always develop applications that leverage Active Directory for authentication, and we always use careful practices to make sure that we're truly securing the application as opposed to just securing by obscurity. Those are difficult things to do, particularly the truly securing all of the application endpoints. And in an on-prem scenario, you may be able to sneak by with that. If you, depending on the size of your office, you may only have if you only have a couple dozen people, to have a custom built application that's using username and password for authentication. It's storing the password. That password is stored clear text in a database. And if someone was carefully looking behind the scenes, they could spy the APIs calls that are going across the network and figure out, oh, okay, if I just make this call, I can hit the data without truly authenticating, and it'll let me do pretty much whatever I want. Sure, I need to know some obscure GUIDs to do that. In a small controlled network, you may not be as concerned as you should be for that. But once you move into the cloud, you can't live by those rules. So you really need, for any sort of applications, you really need to look, if we're moving this application to the cloud, the application is currently running on-prem, like to just lift it and put it in a VM in the cloud. That cloud's going to have potentially a lot more ability to get hit than the on-prem. So look at network security and firewalls and virtual private networks within Azure that are connected via ExpressRoute to on-prem. So the network folks are able to secure the network. But still, you have something that's running in the cloud, and it really hasn't been built with the rigorous security controls that are needed. That's my biggest, that would be my biggest concern about security. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that your applications right now are unsecure, but before you move it, I would certainly make that, do that analysis. Are we using a good user authentication path? Can we move to Active Directory? Can we implement multi-factor authentication on top of that? So now we know who is hitting it. Let's look at how the endpoints are being secured. Are the endpoints going through those security checks, or is the security check really just on the user interface page? And once you hit the user interface page, once you get past the login, you can just do REST calls to the application and just bypass all of that. So you really want to do review how security is implemented in those applications. And also, how does the application communicate to the database? Is the application, if you look at a config file, do you just have a username and password, and that's how the application is authenticating to the database? That configuration file may be protected, but you really need to look at something like integrated security or managed security, such that the security is going through the entire full stack of the application.
Okay, very good. David, do you want to go?
Sure. He mentioned multi-factor authentication as someone who's been part of some incident responses. The vast majority of the severe security breaches that I'm seeing are through paths that did not have multi-factor. So the concern, or something that should be addressed from the beginning, is anything that can be logged into from the internet or accessed from the internet needs to have multi-factor. And it's not even shouldn't be an argument. Shouldn't
At
be
all levels of the organization.
At all
right?
levels, yes. Because we spent, as a firm, we had 4 dedicated resources for a month helping someone respond to a ransomware attack, which was very pricey for them, but all of it could have been prevented if they had multi-factor authentication. So that's first and foremost. And then you don't hear it a lot, but I guess some people do mention it, but I always consider backups as part of security, because you can never 100% prevent a security breach from happening, because there's 0-day exploits that people know about before the application vendors can fix them. And so a good backup will go a long way in getting you back up on your feet if you're a victim of one of those.
Good point.
I agree. Those are the 2 most critical things in my mind from day-to-day support perspective is multi-factor authentication and backups. The important thing to remember, and Greg touched on this, is don't assume the cloud has built-in security. And that will be, there will be different ways of evaluating security in the cloud and some of the controls that you need to put in place, depending on if this is a software as a service application and platform, or if it's infrastructure as a service. If you are working with a software as a service vendor and it's someone who is going to manage the application and you're assuming they provide that level of security, ask the questions. Make sure you understand or ask what their certifications are. Do they ensure reliability? Do they have backups for the application? So just because it's a software as a service model, don't assume that those things are built into the application. Make sure you verify. And if it's a platform that you are managing, then go through the same checklist that you do for your on-prem devices. And there will be some additional components that you need to evaluate for cloud-based applications, but that gives you a good starting point of evaluating how you authenticate and grant access to users, and adopting the practice of least privilege and tiered access, and having backups and multi-factor authentication. So a lot of similarities with the security controls that you would consider for your on-prem applications. You're just thinking about them in a different way when it comes to cloud platforms.
I think the one that you mentioned, least privilege, is one that I see a lot of customers never consider. And that's probably an important one for people to think about.
Especially from the beginning. It's easier, as much as people want to get up and running and they want to just say permit all so the application starts and runs correctly, and then they'll all go back and lock it down. If you do it up front, it's a little bit more effort up front, but down the road, it pays a whole lot more dividends in that you know your security is already there and your application is working. You don't get it working, add security, break it, and then have to fix it. So it's worth it to do the effort up front. And then, our IT audit associate director is not here, but I'll mention this for him. And, policies and procedures and having those clearly defined and your staff trained and held accountable for them, I think is a big important.
We have some upcoming sessions this afternoon that will touch on these topics, but one thing to remember is that security is not a point in time thing. You have to keep continuously assessing what security you have in place. David, you mentioned this. It's if you change a setting as you're troubleshooting, if you allow access to an application to make sure that it's working for someone and you're troubleshooting something, and then you forget to go back and lock it down or change those permissions, who's keeping track of that? Who's checking to make sure that those security controls are still in place and configured correctly? And a cybersecurity assessment, a continuous cybersecurity assessment, is a great way to do this.
All good elements to have as part of your plan.
Yeah, and Paulina touched upon don't trust that the service that you're using is implementing all of the security controls that you need. They may be giving you the tools. They may have the toggles and the controls and the settings in place, but if you don't use them properly, A file server, on-prem, a file server. Yes, that file server can be secure. You have the ability to lock down folders and files to Active Directory groups to where information can't get leaked. But you also have the ability to just say, hey, this folder, everybody can get to it. And you don't even need to be logged in to get to it. Those tools are there to help those business processes that need it, but if they're not used properly, that platform that can provide the strong level security isn't able to because you've configured it not to. So it's not necessarily, it's not always that does the platform offer the security you need, but are you using it properly to leverage the capabilities that exist?
Good point. So we're going to do one more poll. We want to know how well equipped is your team to manage the migration? And so, are you fully prepared and engaged? Do you think you can do this? You just maybe haven't gotten ready for it yet. The majority's covered, but you could use some high-level support, or you need help. I'd like to see where you are. And I think we see customers in a wide range of those things. Again, we're kind of seeing a mix. Got some people that feel like the majority's covered, but could use some high-level support. Not really seeing anybody fully prepared and engaged. I'm going to move on here. So a lot of times we hear this, needs to be done right away, as soon as possible. How fast can I migrate? And I'm going to guess that the first answer is, it depends. Is that correct?
There's the classic internet animated GIF with 3 switches. What is it? Speed, cost, quality, or something like that. Choose 2.
I've seen this.
Yeah. So if you want it fast and you want it cheap, the quality is not going to be good. But if you want it good and fast, the price is going to be,
Yeah.
That's kind of the moniker. But in reality, it does depend. Email migrations can actually be done pretty quickly for just a strict email migration because the tools are out there. We've done so many of them. We've seen just about every pitfall that you can run into as far as a migration can go. And so those can generally be done fairly quickly. But if it's an infrastructure, something, a major infrastructure piece, a major line of business application, you got to be much more deliberate with those.
Anything else to add, Paulina or Greg?
It's much faster if you're well prepared. I will say this. So start planning now. Engage with the right resources. Think about what it is that you're evaluating. If you're evaluating an email migration, then make sure you start the conversation with your IT partner to understand how many mailboxes you have today. What does the migration look like? If you're migrating a line of business application, then who are the right people from each business unit that need to be involved in that pilot group or that evaluation group that starts to think about how do we make this migration possible and what does success look like for us? So when you're evaluating a change for a line of business application, there is a little bit more complexity added because you may have to think about, does this impact my accounting department? Does it impact billing? Does it impact research and development or human resources? And who are the right people that need to be involved in evaluating this possible solution or platform? So it is a little bit different, and you guessed right, it depends is a great answer, but we can absolutely help establish and meet that timeline.
So don't skip the planning part.
Don't skip the planning.
As in a way to cut down on time.
Absolutely.
And before I let you answer, Greg, I just want to check, Julia, do we have any questions? No, okay. Go ahead, Greg. Do you have anything to add into what's already been said here?
Yeah, so if the migration is can be done with the existing line of business applications and processes that you have in place, and you can lift them and move them into the cloud. I think I think that's already been covered. If you're looking at things that were developed custom to you, either by yourself or by your organization or by a third party, and you're looking at migrating it, you want to take this as the opportunity to do some re-architecture or a complete rebuild. To move towards cloud native. And when I mean cloud native, I mean things like Azure Web, Azure SQL, Azure Storage, things where you don't even know anything about the operating system that they're running on. Those can take a lot more effort, and scoping those out and trying to figure out what really needs to be migrated, what path do you want to take. That may take longer, and it may be that you lift up the VM, and I'm gonna make things simple for the infrastructure. Assume that the infrastructure folks can just knock this out. You lift up the VM, you port it over to Azure, and boom, you're done. Yeah, I know I greatly glossed over all the hard work that needs to happen there, but maybe you do that, and then as the next phase, you say, okay, let's move this to cloud native. What can we do to improve the application to reduce the need for maintaining the actual virtual machine itself?
Okay, very good.
We've migrated different applications. Just to provide some examples, David's team has provided assistance and migrated a phone system to a fully cloud-based phone system solution, servers to cloud-based infrastructure as a service, compute resources. Within managed services, we've assisted our clients with migrating their law firm practice management software. On the healthcare side, we have had some cloud migrations for practice management and EHR software. So it is different depending on the industry and the specific business need.
And I think the first step, and maybe that's kind of a good place for us to end here, is the first step is to reach out and have a conversation with us. And we're happy to talk it through with you, because it may be that somebody has a full team and they just need a little extra assistance in planning, or they need help with the full scale. And we can work anywhere within that spectrum. And so our contact information is on here. We're happy to help. And we really appreciate everybody tuning in and participating today. And we hope you found some interesting information and enjoy the presentation. Thank you all very much. Good job, panelists.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you.